and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Jordan.
And I'm Yochai.
Yochai, thank you for joining us. You're one of a select few of guest hosts that we've had over the years. Why are you with us? Why have you been selected to join us on this particular episode? What do you have to say about the tabletop RPG hobby?
I mean, wait. First off, you invited me, but let me just make some, observations. I have a background that it might be relevant to some of what you all talk about or want to talk about on this podcast with respect to technology, Creative Commons, RPGs in general. I created an RPG called Cairn, which is a little bit popular right now, in particular in the especially in the wake of the recent OGL debacle. I actually sent Jordan, in response to his check in with me email about today, I sent him a screenshot of my Cairn store page, and you can see not only did I get a nearly 400% increase in sales since the OGL original announcement, but every time D&D, or I should say D&D Beyond or WotC made a announcement, there's a peak in my sales, every time, this massive spike in sales. So I think I have some opinions about what's going on right now with respect to some of the stuff you guys talk about.
Yeah, I think it's very important that we say exactly what date we are recording this, because this stuff has been changing sometimes day to day. We are recording this on January 28th, the day after the WotC announced that the OGL, that third edition is not going to change, and they released a statement on their website. And after more than a month of a lot of basically community uproar about the expected and coming changes that WotC was going to make to D&D and the licensing and everything that was going on, the entire social media landscape of RPGs over the past month has been just basically a wild shit show.
They also released their SRD, all 400 pages of it, as Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Meaning that you can use any text of it in any way that you want and you don't have to share it. And that included all of the mechanics as well as a whole bunch of monsters and the names of some protected IP. It doesn't mean you can actually use it in your product, but you can reference these names. So things like Beholder and Owlbear, which I think we actually already had access to because it's two common words, but the Illithid, Mind Flayer, that stuff has never been permissible in products that were that weren't directly referencing the SRD, but you could theoretically now just mention a Mind Flayer in your tiny supplement and they're not going to come for you. So that is a big deal. It's 400 pages of Creative Commons text. It pretty much resolves not every issue, but a lot of issues people had with the original leak about a month ago.
Yeah, there's still a whole lot of stuff that was published under the OGL that it's not entirely clear is totally safe at this point. They haven't done anything to explicitly ban them the way that it kind of seems like they ought to be just implied to prevent them from stopping it. But I mean, if I was a third party publisher of OGL stuff, I would probably reprint things under CC immediately just to be sure. It's just my thoughts on it.
They also didn't release another OGL that would then enshrine the previous OGL, because right now
that's what I mean. Yeah.
Right. Well, but specifically the old OGL is a perpetual license that is revocable, and what I think we need from them now, we being creators who may or may not choose to put the OGL into their products, we need to see a version of the OGL that makes the old OGL, non-revocable. I would make the point you don't need the OGL at all. You never did. It never protected you. I think it's a bad thing that you shouldn't include unless you are directly accessing, protected content in the SRD. But at the same time, there's all these products that contain the OGL, and folks friends of mine were worried about whether they had to go and update their old products with a new OGL or take out the OGL or take out some references, whatever. Those people I think would sleep easier today if they knew that OGL was not revocable. Although I think this five or 400 page SRD that they released makes them feel that way as well. So it's not like we definitely won, but we also are still waiting for this little thing from them.
Yeah, I'm still not even convinced that the revocability was an actual right that they had. I think that a court was probably going to wind up deciding that, and somebody at WotC decided that between court costs and customer goodwill and brand damage and all that, it just wasn't worth the battle. But I suspect that based on what lots of people, including Ryan Dancy, have said, it sounds like they just kind of invented that revocable right, and we're just going to try it until somebody really checked them on it.
Yeah, I think that this is like, since third edition and the OGL first came into existence, like right before then, before Wizards of the Coast bought D&D, the D&D brand was incredibly litigious, and they went after a lot of people. And since then, they've kind of been a little bit more hands off, and they've been a little bit more free with their intellectual property, and giving a mechanism by which people could kind of believe that they could go through and include all these things into their products. And I think the past month and a half has shown that has become the expectation, and there was this big fear that with the language that Wizards was using, or Hasbro was using, I should probably say more accurately, that a lot of that was going to go by the wayside, and it sounded like they were going to become probably as litigious or even more as what TSR was back in the old days.
I mean, I think it's even worse than that. If I could just add, I think the fact that they might sue is less offensive to me than the fact that they were going to take up to 20% of earnings beyond $750K. That to me is mind-boggling. Like, Kickstarters make $1 million, right? The old school Essentials Kickstarter made nearly that, and the notion that they could just claim that was so repugnant. Way more than revoking their license or threatening to do so, because you never needed it in the first place. So I was not really worried about it. But yeah, sorry. I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think they probably tipped their hand a little bit there, because that doesn't make a lot of economic sense. And a lot of people have pointed out how this looks like the type of agreement that you would propose to somebody when you want them to decline it. This looks like an industry sweeping kind of move, where they seem to have wanted to be the only people producing anything for this game, while maintaining some kind of guise of like, oh yeah, it's an ecosystem, you can join up, whatever, blah blah blah. But I mean, nobody in their right mind would have signed that thing. So the same people that proposed that in the first place are the same people who are still in charge. So let's keep that in mind at all times. And I'm curious, Yochai, we were talking a little bit before about how you're getting ready for some new Cairn content, second edition that you're working on. This has touched on some of the things that you work on, spells like you were mentioning. Does the fact that this stuff is now CC change your plans at all?
No, why would it? I was going to make the second edition CC as well. CC by SA anyways. Mechanics can't be...
I mean, things you're including.
Oh, well, I'm not going to include anything that is from the SRD. I have no plans to. There's nothing in there for me. Mechanics can't be copyrighted, and that has always been the case. There's no reason for me to ever use their SRD. There's just no reason. I understand why some folks might want to, because they might want to refer to specific elements of D&D, especially 5th edition, something like a ranger archetype or something. I don't use that stuff. So not only does my system already stray too far from D&D to ever need to pull from the SRD, but it's Creative Commons already. I don't need to do anything. There is no license other than the CC by SA license for Cairn, which I'm not... Look, I mean, some people don't like that. Some people really don't like that I force anyone who takes my system and hacks it to also share the bits that they've hacked. And I understand that. I think CC by is, for those who don't know, it's less restrictive. You can take a whole set of text and you can do whatever you want with it, and you don't have to license it as CC BY. You can do whatever you want. You can make it completely, proprietary if you wanted to. But CC BY SA, share alike, it means take my text, change any aspects of it you want, but if you end up releasing any portion of that changed text in a product, you have to also license that portion as CC BY SA. So you could take the D666 table from my website, which is licensed as CC BY SA 4.0. You could include one spell from that in your document, and only that one spell would be CC BY SA. Everything else could be whatever you want. But, my background is in open source software, so I tend to lean towards a more restrictive attitude when it comes to allowing people to make something I already open sourced closed source. So that's just a personal choice. I don't knock anyone for doing it CC BY SA. I also don't knock WotC for releasing their product as just CC BY. I think that's fine. That's a good thing. But there is a difference to me.
So, all right, we're starting to flirt with getting into the weeds that I actually wanted to talk about here. So you're bringing up, the comparison to the open source software, and Ryan Dancy has been explicit that, the famous essay of The Cathedral and the Bazaar was one of the kind of foundational documents that inspired the OGL back in the day. 2000 was still pretty early on in the open source movement. I mean, you got Linux hitting the scene in the early 90s, but really, kind of becoming a thing that a lot of folks started hearing about in the late 90s, I think. You've got an interesting thing going on here, I think. The idea, I believe, for the OGL was to create an ecosystem where creators could make their own stuff and then draw people to Dungeons and Dragons. And they were sort of outsourcing their creativity, I think, in a big way. And you saw the ecosystem boom. I think there's an added point of interest here that I feel like might have gotten a little bit lost in the shared tackling of common problems, mechanical problems that come up, and design problems that we see in role-playing games over and over again. The OSR has been amazing for this. There's so many great ideas, different approaches, different levels of granularity, and it's going to be different for different people. How much crunch they feel like having, how much they want to abstract, how much they want to make it a descriptive narrative kind of deal, whatever. But when you've got the whole, for whoever might not know the essay, the kind of central thesis about the Cathedral and the Bazaar is that you've got kind of two approaches to design things. That you can have this sort of centralized, cathedral approach where everybody's got this big architecture, in mind. We're all kind of working towards this one thing, and it's top down. The Bazaar model, metaphor, is everybody kind of working together sort of from their own angle, but tackling the same kind of problem. And you get some interesting perspectives that you might not have thought of, from the central authority model. Yochai, Karen is an inheritor of some really cool innovations. I think you've mentioned Into the Odd repeatedly as being one of your favorite games. What do you think about some of the innovations that we've seen? Obviously, you've adopted a ton. And do you think that this new CC SRD for 5.1 is going to have a whole nother wave of people kind of moving into that space? Where do you think we go from here?
I hope so. I really genuinely hope so. I mean, we have people now who, for the first time, are considering not only switching systems, but making their own stuff. They've been introduced to it by osmosis. Oh, wait, there's such a thing as an SRD? What's the point of that? oh, look, I'm, some creator, some publisher who's only worked with, your standard WotC D&D for years, but now I'm going to make my own system. You see in Matt Colville talking about removing to hit rolls. It's like, yeah, welcome to 2012, whenever, was it BX Razor, the blog that kind of started that whole thing of removing to hit rolls. Like, yeah, welcome to the OSR. Like, it's what they've been doing for years, and good, even if he wasn't aware of that as a concept before, I'm glad that this is spurning creativity. So I think it's objectively a good thing. I think it's 100% a net positive.
We've recently adopted that exact method in my old school D&D game that I've been running, where we're running through like the first module or first published adventures and dungeons and things that ever came out, basic D&D, like OD&D era random stuff like Dungeoneer and that kind of thing. And I personally love it. If you have not tried removing attack rolls, consider it. From this gets into one of the ideas that I've been thinking a lot about, that I think a lot of designers are good at tackling some of these, I'll call them bugs. I think a lot about role-playing games as being a software that is running on our brains collectively. And so a lot of the problems that you address in designing applications and networking, things like that, bandwidth issues, you see the same kind of things happening in role-playing games. The complexity of having something like an attack roll with modifiers, plus and minus and whatever, the task switching of having to bounce these calculations back and forth between two people, and then finally doing your resolution, and then doing the redundant step of doing the whole thing over again with damage rolls. Like, you can slice out a bunch of that and make a very elegant, fast running game, because ultimately I think most of us are there for the experience of it and not for the calculation of it, right?
Well, you touched on a few different things there. So I would agree with you that, rules are just agreed upon assumptions that everyone happens to share at that moment. So if I say like, okay, from now on, we're going to adjudicate this situation by doing X, Y, and Z, does everyone agree to that? That becomes a rule. It's not a ruling. It's a shared agreement that we've all said, okay, we're doing it that way. And a rule book is just full of those rules, and they're well thought out and balanced against each other, and they create a cohesive whole. That's the idea behind a rule system. The OSR promotes rulings over rules. So you kind of leave things a little loose and don't try to come up with grapple rules or falling damage. Just do what makes sense in the moment, but be consistent, right? That's what the OSR promotes. And the irony of this is, I feel like there has been a lot of innovation in the OSR, specifically around rulings over rules and around like tiny tweaks to the core rule set. But ultimately, there hasn't actually been as much creativity in the OSR with kind of destroying a lot of the sacred cows. Like, a lot of times there still are 6 stats, right? You still have 6 stats. That's like really important to people. You still have levels. You still have advancement as they understand it, or gold for XP. You still have these core pillars of old school play that aren't philosophical. They're mechanics, and they enforce some of that philosophy of play, but they're ultimately just text that we all agreed to follow. And while the OSR has seen a lot of innovation, and I think continues to promote just incredible creativity, I do find it curious that if you even shy from following all of these core tenets and keeping them in your rules, you are often ostracized. I mean, that's sort of what happened to me when I was first promoting Karen as an OSR game, or even not just Karen, it was actually Into the Odd prior to that, where folks would tell me that's not OSR because OSR games need to have, and then they would list, essentially what OSE has, or BX Essentials at the time, or any of these older retro clones. And that was extremely frustrating to me as a person who was trying to uphold what I thought was an OSR philosophy of play, but being told that the rules I was changing took it away from that. And there's probably a little bit of truth to that, but one thing I'm happy to say now is that I think that's less true. I think people have sort of come around to some degree and accepted that the rule systems are not representative of the playstyle as a whole. And so, like with software, you can do something in a totally different way. You can have a multi-user system, not a single-user system, for example, and still have a user experience that is, workable for most people. And I think that's what Linux went through, a similar process where it was essentially castigated to just the internet for years and years. And despite it having a very small market share in the desktop world, it still absolutely dominates in all these other places because of its flexibility. So not to make, too many comparisons between open source software and rule systems, but I think there is a sort of shared tenacity in these rules variants that eventually, if you keep pushing long enough, people will kind of come around, especially if you create spaces in which that's possible. And I think that's one of my favorite things about the internet. And there's a lot of annoying things on the internet, but I love that you can create a space where it's okay to talk about what you want to talk about without feeling ostracized. And that's what I've tried to do. That's always what I'm trying to do.
For sure. This going back to this business of rulings over rules, I've always thought of that as a little bit of a sleight of hand. Maybe not intentionally, but in practice anyway. Because like you said, if you're going to be consistent, if you want to present the players with a campaign world that has the feeling of some kind of permanence, that if I try a thing and then I try it again in all the same conditions, that it's going to work, pretty much the same way, with some unpredictability for drama or whatever, but it's the same basic thing you can count on if you want to adopt that thing as a tactic. But when you make a ruling on the run, if you don't record that in some way, and then do a completely different ruling the next time something similar comes up, you've kind of shortchanged the players who may be expecting that same sort of treatment numerically, which is the ultimate arbiter of, what is the state of the game. But, as soon as you start writing these things down, you're building a rule system. I don't know. Rulings are rules that are being tried out, I feel like.
They're rules that haven't been exported yet.
Yeah.
That's the way I think about them. They're just kind of temporary, tweaked versions of existing rules that may or may not replace future rules. But they are different than rules, but they're in a kind of temporary state. They're in a localized state. They're not out there for others to use yet.
If somebody wants to do something in Cairn, I don't know. Let's say I want to swing on a vine across a river or something. You probably don't have well, I know for a fact you don't have a swing on a vine across a river skill.
Well, there is a governing rule for putting yourself in danger and what to do in that scenario. There's an abstraction. Essentially, whoever is most at risk taking the action makes a save under the appropriate stat, but which stat to use, that's up to you, as the warden.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, barring from the software, comparison, again, it's, you can do work in an application either at the compile time when you're kind of, building the application, or at runtime when it's actually, going. And I see a similarity here that, like, 3rd edition D&D or Pathfinder or whatever you want to use, it's got a whole lot of, like, compile time work baked into it. You can look up, what's the modifier for, a slippery vine on a slippery rock at 4:30 in the morning in the jungle, or something very similar to it. If you don't have that baked in somewhere, then the labor is then on the DM's part, that you've got to come up with something. You've got to be fair about it. Often there's going to be a little bit of debate back and forth, like, oh, well, my character's got these sweet gloves that are, really good at gripping on slippery vines or whatever. So I don't know. I go back and forth on how much I want
I can make
to
a
be like
to that, though.
A quick thing. Sure, go for it.
So the counterpoint is, depending on who you are, there is labor in even looking in the rule book. There's not just a cost of labor. There's a cost of the reality of the moment. So like when I take a step back and look at what it is that we are doing, like, what is role playing? Like, what is it? My opinion is it's a shared empathy machine. It's a way for us to create a scenario in which we all see the same thing, agree on the same thing without actually ever, truly sharing what's going on in our minds. So there's a magic that happens between the collaborative storytelling cycle, conversation, whatever you want to call it. There's something happening there. We're building something. We are outputting the software. When you have to go and check on a rule in the rule book, depending on who you are, your experience with play, the kind of play you like, that can be bad. Like for me, it's bad. For me, the idea of thinking of where in the book it is and looking it up and then pointing at it. First off, my experience running crunchier systems tells me that there are still arguments, regardless of whether it's in a book or not. That means nothing. My brother-in-law, who I ran 5th edition with for years, and he played 3.5 before that, that guy will argue with me when I run my own system for him. He'll argue about the rules with me. and I'm not even exaggerating, like he does that. And he did that in previous systems I ran as well, where he would look, no, that's not what they mean. So like that does not, rules lowering is a thing. But second, there is a real cost to that because the shared machine, the thing that we're generating, it stops. That's the end of the machine for the moment. And then you have to kind of go back into it. Now, some people don't play for that. Some people like the mechanics. Some people like just to be around their friends. And that's totally legit, like terrific. That's not why I'm there. I'm not there to be with my friends. I'm there to create a, shared illusion that is equally beneficial to all. And if they're not there for the same reason, I'm not playing with them. So I would make the argument that, there is a cost to the warden to do this. It's not easy for everybody. It totally isn't easy. But to me, for my playstyle, the cost of pulling up someone else's ruling is far, far greater.
Sure, legit. And there's been many times in my own game where, there's a dramatic moment and I'm like, okay, I don't exactly remember what kind of fucking grapple rules I'm using this week. Because my game, and I'm sorry, Clayton, and to all my players, like, it is absolutely my laboratory, and week after week, I'm tweaking systems. I try to kind of update them with sort of a changelog announcement, but man, like, I'm thinking on it constantly and updating it like hourly. But the idea is to get it, as clean and quick as possible while still feeling like the kind of game that I want to run, what I think my players want to run. But, when you're talking about these things, like, I start thinking about what kind of place that VTTs and other kinds of like digital tools hold in the future of role-playing games for us. Like, every single one of my players lives like 900 miles away from me. So there's no getting outside of a digital interaction for this game. The tabletop life is just over for me at this point in my life. And so I start wondering, like, people really gave 4th edition a lot of hell, and I think rightly so, because it was clearly something that was designed in order to run in a digital environment that could be monetized and all that shit. Just like we're starting to see 1D&D obviously developing into something like that. But I'm hoping that all of this shit has not really poisoned the well when it comes to digital tools, because I think there's something to be said for a certain amount of complexity in rule systems. And when you are letting computers do the math that they're best at, and also, things like, VTT spaces and that sort of stuff, to enhance that kind of shared illusion that you're talking about, Yochai. Like, I think there's something to be gained there. I mentioned before, I worry a lot about a lot of these OSR games. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like there's some kind of Luddite kind of inertia to some of this stuff. What do you think? That was a lot of rambling.
Okay, so my general opinion is VTTs are good. You don't need to just use a VTT. People have been doing play-by-post on forums for 20 years. I mean, The Expanse books / TV shows, those came out of play-by-posts through forums online with like George R.R. Martin, so it's not a new concept. VTTs in general aren't even new. And you're right, 4th edition supposedly was designed for that, and it never happened, and they're probably kicking themselves. But Yeah, I'm for them. I don't know if there's a Luddite impulse. There certainly are Luddites, but I know right now. Do you know the OSR creator Gus L? He does a number of pretty well regarded OSR products. Anyways, he's extremely anti-tech in terms of his personal preferences. He runs games on Discord all the time. They're audio only, so it's one of those I think that there is a platform for everybody. You can run Alba Rodeo, or you can run Schmeppy, which is literally a digital whiteboard, or you can do what, I know some pretty tech savvy people who use just Miro and just run, they just share their screen. Or I used to run Google Hangouts on G+, and I would use their I would just use the presentation tool to just draw little circles, and that was enough. And I'm a freaking Linux guy, and I still was okay with that. So I think in the next couple of years, that will be the de facto way of play for a lot of people. Like you, my players are all across the country. Actually, 2 live here, but my third player lives in California. And when he moved there from New York, we were like, okay, what are we going to do? So we switched from in-person to play by post, which is a huge, huge change. And it's all on Discord, and I have it all in text. I can search it for things that I've said. I can take my time to respond. I seem like a much better GM on Play by Post, frankly, because I have time to really think about what should happen in a certain situation. On the flip side, you don't get that same constant stream of magic, unless we all happen to be playing at the same time. And there's a lot of back and forth. It's usually 2 or 3 posts a day, which sounds crappy until you think about the fact that 3 years have passed, and that's 3 years of 2 to 3 posts a day. It's a lot of play. On the other hand, I've run many games on Foundry because there's a cairn, what they call a system for Foundry, and it's great. I really like being able to not have to describe the dungeon as much in those situations. I just let the players discover it as they're walking around, or at least discover what the limits of their visibility is. There's a kind of a cute aspect to that. On the other hand, there's a ton of lead up to it. I have to map the walls and make sure that no light can escape. And I'm self-hosting it. I can see why that would be a difficult thing for some people. On the flip side, you've got places like Roll and I think it's called Roll.com and Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds or whatever, these different VTTs that kind of do that for you. You just import the entire adventure. You can do that for some stuff on Foundry as well. You just import an adventure, you import the system, and boom, it's all there. You don't have to do any of the work. I think that's pretty cool. I can never see myself doing that. I'll always just do my own thing. But yeah, I guess I'm less cynical than you. That's to sum up all that ramble.
You think I'm cynical?
Well, you think that there's a Luddite aspect kind of holding a little bit of it back, right? Or did I mischaracterize that?
Well, I guess what it seems to me is that there's a big emphasis on the printed, be it physical paper or PDF medium, and it the whole OSR was born out of this whole return to procedural gaming and blah blah blah, and that whole kind of romanticized yesteryear game table. But what I'm thinking about is the game design decisions that can happen, the possibilities that are there when you have a computer to do a lot of the stuff for you. There's so much design that goes into a lot of these OSR games that look like they're trying to optimize it for on-the-fly calculation and determination of game state and things like that. But there are these tools that can do a lot of this shit much better. When you look at spell lists and stuff like that from a lot of OSR games, you're not some newer games, I guess. By that I mean the last 10 years or something. You don't have ranges a lot of times. You don't have durations. You don't have area of effects. A lot of these sort of spatial kind of data points and stuff like that probably will come up. And if you're playing in something like a VTT that you've already got the geometry of the shared illusory world right there in front of you, someone's going to wonder what is the diameter of this blast radius or something, right? And yes, nobody wants to pause the drama and go look up, how many dice am I going to be doing and what's the save and all that shit. But you could have a button that just does it, and Roll20 does that, and a lot of other places, you can plug in macros and all that sort of shit. But what I'm getting at though is what looks to me like a verdant space that is straddling the genres of online gaming and tabletop role-playing games that lots of people are kind of seeing. The only explicit attempt I've seen at writing something straight for that was that Burn Bright game that Roll20 tried, and I think just completely flopped. And I didn't look into it much, and it didn't look all that exciting to me. But there's a lot you can do there that I don't think we've really considered thoroughly. Well, there's offloading that stuff. What is the difference between a role-playing game and between an MMORP server and a tabletop role-playing game on a VTT?
Okay, I have 3 things I need to okay. Let me just start with that last one. So the difference is whether or not the story that is being generated is generated from the minds of the players or from the minds of a computer. Like in terms of when you're playing World of Warcraft, you're playing in someone else's story. You're not necessarily generating your own story. You could, go on a raid with some people you met, and what happens to you there generates a sort of meta story. You could totally do that. But you also, that's not why you're there. It's not really what's happening. I think you could have everything automated and still have it be a role-playing game on a VTT. I totally do. I don't think the fact that the computer does it makes it not less of a real RPG experience. However, I do also think that there is a sort of inherent danger to moving to the digital front, and that is in exclusive deals. So, for example, I've talked about this a few times. Skull Fungus, who's a prominent OSR artist and creator, has released a number of different Into the Odd based games over the years. He released one a couple years ago called Mutants of Ix. You can buy it for like $3. It's tiny, it's cool, really cute art, and it's a post-apocalyptic Into the Odd hack. Recently, he released a beautiful hardcover book through Games Omnivorous called Isle of Ix, or Isles. I don't remember if it has an S. Anyways, it's cute. It probably doesn't need to be a beautiful hardcover. It's a limited thing. They only made like 1,000 copies. I have it. It's good. I like it. I like his work. What I didn't really love is that the PDF version, the digital version of Isle of Ix, the only way you can really get it, because the Games Omnivorous one is expensive and it's limited. The only way you could get Isle of Ix otherwise is to buy it on, I don't remember if it's roll.com or roll. Yeah, it's roll.com, on ROLE.com. You could go and buy it from them directly, and it's like, it comes with all their VTT tools built into it, or you could just buy it for yourself, and whatever, it's like $6, but you're not going to find it on Drive-Thru. You're not going to find it on Itch. You're not going to find it through his own website. It's only through this third-party VTT. And that scares the hell out of me. That I'm much, much more worried about from a potential for a problem. That reminds me of early Steam days, or, any of the other like big games publishers that have DRM. Like, I don't want that. And then lastly, one nice thing about the move to digital front is the easeability of hacking games. Like, an example to sort of go with Cairn yet again is when I first published Cairn, I made it available as an SRD. Like, the entire text is just also the SRD on the CairnRPG.com website. I also have instructions there for forking the website on GitHub if you want to make your own hack of Cairn. And that has happened now, I don't know, 25 times. And some of those times are just to make a different language version, to localize it in Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, or whatever. But other people have hacked it to make new systems, like Liminal Horror, which is a kind of Call of Cthulhu-esque game based on Cairn that has kind of erupted into its own scene. It has its own modules, and it has its own exclusive deals, by the way, with like Exalted Funeral. But you can go to the Liminal Horror website, and it just looks like the Cairn website. Like, he just forked it, which is great. It's what I wanted. And he was able to start from scratch and rebuild the system how he wanted it to be. And I think that's another potential with the rise of software and the digital version of RPGs becoming more common. But yeah, so that was a lot of things responding to everything that you said, but sorry.
No, yeah, that was great. There are a few open source VTTs, yeah, like we've been talking about, to whatever varying degrees, like Mythic Table, Foundry, a couple others. I wonder if we're gonna see something like like some kind of either a shared protocol or API or something like that, or some abstraction library, or some kind of tool like some equivalent of like WordPress or Squarespace or something like that to allow people to easily build content that is more or less, universal, or at least for those VTTs that want to be open. Obviously, it's looking a lot like D&D Beyond is going to be one of these dystopian walled garden type of scenarios. But I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of room to grow for developing tools for that kind of stuff for people who are maybe not software engineers, but game designers anyway.
Right. And you mentioned Mythic Table, which I think is open source, right? And also there's this app called Fari, or Fari. It was originally built for Fate, but you can kind of build your own sort of system on top of it. It's not easy to do. So you mentioned the problem of folks having an uphill battle with some of this stuff. It is, yeah, I don't know if the answer is a protocol or some really good software. Like if Foundry open sourced their software, I don't think it'd be any easier. It's hard. You have to know Node.js. It's not. I think. Yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but I used to dream of if Hasbro built a sort of Facebook-like or Google Plus-like RPG, like central portal that had both a Discord-like element for different systems to chat about, but also VTT tools built in. Yeah, it would suck because it would be a monolith, or a cathedral rather, but it would be relying on some major publisher. But I think when it comes to D&D, like, I don't know, that's always going to be around. Like, I'm not as afraid of that. And I remember how, one thing I loved about Google Plus was you could just start a game because just use Google Hangouts. It was just right there. And I think that's actually more of the key to making VTTs really successful, is creating a social aspect to them that isn't entirely proprietary. That's easy to get to. Like, one frustration I have with Discord, for instance, which is the dominant tabletop communication platform for, at least for my experience. I guess, you'll see Reddit and stuff and all these other various web forums, but Discord is just like, there's just so much going on there. I'm afraid, if Discord went out of business, that's hundreds of thousands of RPG servers just gone. And I tried to build my own like discourse-based online forum and just never took off. So I can see that it's pretty difficult. And I know some folks who only play on like Board Game Geek or RPG Geek, but none of these have the same tools that something like Discord has built into it. Like, you could really easily run a VTT through Discord. So I still kind of imagine something like that happening, just like a open source client that connects to a federated database of servers that has built-in VTT functions. Like that to me would be ideal. And then all these other ones can go do whatever they want. But if you just had this one you could rely on to just do basic gaming, it would be pretty rad.
Yeah, I've fantasized about a similar situation. If you could incorporate that with something Wikipedia-like as a gigantic repository of various game rules, that would be some kind of open source role-playing game utopia that we could spend the rest of our lives in, I think. I want to get into this one last little bit here. We're just about up on time. But the big conversation right before Hasbro decided to pull down their pants and take a shit on the coffee table of the entire fucking role-playing game hobby, people were talking a lot about AI art and what its implications are going to be for the hobby, for creators, so on and so forth. I haven't talked to either of you guys about any of this stuff, and I do web development. I'm not a machine learning engineer of any stripe. I know about as much as anybody that watches a YouTube video about it is going to know. But I was seeing a lot of people basically trying to make an ethical case against anyone using AI generated art in their role-playing game products, which strikes me as a pretty rough stance to take. I'm just curious. I'd like to hear both of you all what you think about AI, the ethics around things like DALL-E and all this other stuff that people can use, and how you feel about using it in a role-playing game publishing context.
I was trying to let Clayton go first because I've talked a lot.
All right, I'll just go first then. How do I feel? I feel that like the idea that anyone can go to one of these sites that has an AI generator and they can create their own character portrait of their character that they're using in their home game. That's cool. That's something I've experimented a little bit with and had mixed results with so far. But as the technology gets better, me getting exactly what I want out of it is going to get better. But when it comes to publishers, I don't know where I stand, because there are very small independent content creators who cannot afford to have an art department, or cannot afford to hire an artist to even just do cover art. And I'm one of those people who I do not have the ability to draw anything. I've never been a very good artist. I've tried at it and just always failed. And if I were to make something, the quality of the art would be incredibly limited. And I personally don't know of, I don't have very many friends who I would be able to call upon and say, hey, as a favor to me, can we go together on this product and make art for it, or make a product for either the tabletop RPG hobby or something else. And because of the small creator, that's where I don't know where I stand on it, because I do feel like a quote bigger creator should be using an actual artist in order to generate the types of things that go in the books. But I have no idea where the line is between a small creator and a large creator, and I have no idea. I just don't know where I stand on it.
I have opinions. I think I used Midjourney extensively when it first came out. It was interesting, and I'm also not an artistic person, so just seeing what it could do, I didn't use it with any plans on including it in published works, but I wanted to say, well, what would this look like? I really love Mobius, right? But he's dead. So what would it look like if Mobius made this? Like that stuff is interesting. On the flip side, over time kind of realizing, well, none of these artists are getting anything from this, but their labor is being used, sometimes directly, like almost, frame for frame or whatever, to help further this other business and people who are using it as a tool. That is a little more icky. To respond to Clayton's point about I'm not an artist and I don't know what I would do. I'm not an artist, so I used the vast resources available to me in public domain art. I actually have a list on my website, newschoolrevolution.com, it's in my downloads section, or about, I don't know, it's in the stuff I've done section. There's a list of public domain resources you can rely on. There is a crap ton of amazing public domain art. You do have to kind of mess with it a little bit. So I just did it in GIMP, honestly. But Karen is 100% public domain art. It's all artists who've been dead for 100 years. And I think it looks pretty good, frankly. It's a certain look. It doesn't always work. But that is always an option for people, and always has been an option. That all being said, I really love paying for art. I have a module that will come out imminently that is full of really incredible art that I got to pay for, which, I'm lucky that that's something I can do. I understand that it's not always available to people. For what it's worth, a cover, like a good cover, costs probably $300. And if you tie that into your sales or into a Kickstarter, it does work itself out. But I can understand why that's not accessible to people. You also don't necessarily need a cover. I mean, depends on what you're doing, but art does help sell it. It really does. All that being said, the cat is out of the bag, right? There's no going back. There was similar kind of debates when photography was a thing. People said it was going to steal the art job of artists that were doing portraits and stuff like that. And I can understand why that would be the case. And it's always been hard for artists, and it's not going to get easier as a result. I don't think there's an easy road ahead for most artists. I also don't take this firm stance of some kind of like AI ethicist. I think it's too soon to tell. I do hope that artists get money if their art is used in the promotion of someone else's product. So Midjourney and DALL-E are both relying on artists that just had their art on the internet. And the question is really, is using that art like a royalties problem with... Is it a problem that they're using that art without paying royalties to these artists? And that's not something I can really determine. That the courts will probably determine that, and it will happen. But putting art aside, I have used OpenAI, like ChatGPT. I have used it for development of RPG stuff. And I'll tell you how. It's not particularly original, but it is useful. Like the other day, I built this setting generator, and you can go to like Perchance, which is like a generator website, and you can run my generator, and it will pull from a list of 100 nouns and 100 adjectives, and it will create names for places within the setting. And I wanted to use a bunch of different words, but some words were adjectives, some words were nouns, and some words were both nouns and adjectives. And I didn't want to go through it. So I literally put the list in ChatGPT and said, hey, ChatGPT, can you just make a list of the words that are only nouns? And it freaking did it. It was amazing. And so for stuff like that, I mean, I used it the other day to tell me what the right regex for doing I wanted to like find and remove text that started with certain letter, but only in certain circumstances. It just told me immediately what the right regex to use, or what the right regular expression was to use. So from a coding perspective, it's kind of amazing. There's also some problems there, you know. I will also point out that it's frequently wrong. Like I'll tell it like, spit out 10 more like nouns from this list, but don't repeat the nouns, and then it will just repeat the nouns. It's so stupid sometimes. It's not like we've gotten used to Google just telling us the answer, and you cannot trust ChatGPT. But damn, has it been useful for like rote tasks. I don't find it as useful for creativity. One last thing about it. I took the entire text of the Cairn SRD, which is a markdown file, and I copy and pasted that into ChatGPT. And then I asked it to make me a character, and it did. It was insane. The math was all wrong, but it did do it. It like spit out a character based on the rules, and randomly like it like did math, but showed the wrong answers. It was so weird. But still, that is incredible stuff. Not without its problems.
That's pretty amazing. The reason I brought up AI art in this conversation is that I feel like these weird edges that we're all kind of like trying to figure out. Clayton was saying, I don't know the line, you know, and like where are things blurring as far as like what does an author or an artist own? You know, this is the metaphysic that we're all kind of picking at around, you know, the Creative Commons stuff with D&D, the pretty spurious claims on various monsters and things that Hasbro has put forth, you know, and what we're doing as a community, like creating this kind of like shared space of like open games that people hack on and things like that. And, you know, it's starting to look to me like a lot of our shared convictions about this metaphysical concept of intellectual property is starting to fray at the edges quite a bit. That society and technology are putting so much pressure on this thing. We're starting to see it kind of buckle. It's not clear to me that what a artificial intelligence does with a library of, you know, 10 billion images or whatever it is, and then spitting out something is all that different from what the artist's brain is doing with all of the art that they've ever seen, you know? And like what does it mean to be original? What does it mean to be creative? And what does it mean to own an idea? Like it's starting to feel more and more to me like people are trying to put a fence around a cloud. So I don't know. I just wanted to see what you guys thought about some of this stuff, because this is literally the frontier of how our society is dealing with some of these philosophical topics.
Well, we're starting to get a little bit longer. Yochai, usually at the end we talk about give a suggestion of a geek thing that we have encountered and we want to share with the people who listen to us. I'll go ahead and start with geek things if unless anybody has any other points they want to get in right at the end.
No, let's do it. That'll give me time to think of a geek thing. So go ahead.
All right. So my geek thing is going to be hang on, I lost the link. Oh shit, I lost the link. Okay, here it is. It's a YouTube video by specifically by Folding Ideas. Folding Ideas is a great channel. If you don't watch it, I highly recommend it. But they released a video. It was back in November, but I just watched it recently. Why it is rude to suck at Warcraft. And it goes into the explanation. It goes into the philosophy of that's very pertinent to tabletop RPGs of the expectation of a group of people playing the same game, and when there's a difference in what the game is there for. Why goes into talking about not only just like specifically in Warcraft, why it's kind of it is expected of every player in the party to be as good as they can at that game of Warcraft. And it also goes into talking about other games where it's entirely player created goals within the games, like specifically like speed runs or games where you create a special limitation that you're going to try to beat the game by. Just talking about all the different ways that we create our own ways of playing the game and the ethics of doing that without and how you need to get anybody else who is participating with you on board with that, or else you're just being an asshole by playing the game in a way that is not supposed to be played when everybody else around you is expecting it, and you're basically taking the fun away from them.
Right. Well, that's just a kind of a shared agreement, right? That's when you come and sit at the table, there's an expectation that people are there for the same reason. You know, it's just like if you started playing a game and one of the PCs said, "I want to be an evil character," and then just like kills one of the other PCs. Nobody really wants that. Like there's a kind of a shared, what's the phrase? We're living in a society, you know? I feel like that's not crazy to expect from people. I don't know why you would need to make a video about it, but I'm sure he backs it up in has specific examples. But it actually is a very good jumping off point for what I want to share, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay.
There's a game there is a book called Games Agency as Art by C.T. Nguyen. It came out last year. Nguyen is a philosopher. He loves games and is fascinated by games and what they kind of explain about being human. And he talks a lot about how humans create this sort of shared delusion when they play games, where they suddenly pretend to care a lot about like little red blocks on a table. Like we are going to agree that for the next 2 hours, the most important thing in this room are these little red blocks. And then after those 2 hours are over, they are completely irrelevant. They don't matter at all. And how that's a really interesting exploration of human agency. Like, why do we suddenly pretend things are important? What does that give us as human beings? And he lists his favorite example of what's called a stupid game as it's called Bag on the Head. And it's basically everyone puts bags on their heads and then they try to take off bags off of other people's heads. And when you lose your bag, you have to go sit down. And that the best part of the game is when you're all sitting down and watching just one person swinging their hands around trying to find other people, but they have a bag on their head. Like that's the best part of the game, is this kind of shared stupidity that moment. So you just reminded me of that. Like, even in that stupid game, everyone is operating under the same assumptions of play, and that's just kind of essential for games to be games. You know, what are games? Like, what makes Candyland, in my opinion, not really a game? It's more of an activity. And my answer would be that there's no agency. Like, you don't do anything in Candyland. You just pull a card and do what the card says. There's no decision made at any point. It's a good activity, and it's great for kids to learn about games, but it isn't a game. And this book explores those kinds of concepts. He doesn't actually talk about Candyland that much, unfortunately. And I'd strongly recommend people who don't want to read the book just listen to interviews with him. You can find them pretty easily. He links to them on his website. But yeah, it's Games, Agency as Art by C.T. Nguyen.
Nice. My thing is going to be a YouTube channel that I've recently tripped across called The AI Wizard. Very small channel. Guy's got maybe 10 videos up here. And what he's doing is exploring some of the AI tools that are available directly in a role-playing game context. He plays around with ChatGPT for doing like adventure writing stuff. He plays around with Stable Diffusion a little bit for making battle maps and things like that. And it's pretty remarkable to watch this stuff unfold right in front of you. I really can't help but get the feeling like pretty much everything, every profession, but right now artists, is quickly going the way of the lamplighter, the wheelwright, the bobbin boy, what have you. It's, I don't know. I think we're going to see a handful of people that are super talented and sought after for their reputation, but a lot of this kind of stuff, this like, low hanging fruit kind of content generation. It's hard for me to see how every incentive is not towards going for tools like this. And I don't know that it's all that different than Photoshop, to be completely honest with you, at the end of the day. But yeah, it's a cool channel, the AI Wizard. He deserves more subs. Check him out if you're interested in this kind of stuff.
What's a bobbin boy?
Back in the late Industrial Revolution, a bobbin boy would work in a textile mill to go run after actual string on a spool for the women who are sitting there working at the textile machines. And so they're little kids. This is like the era of child labor, and they're like ducking and weaving, running as fast as they can, going between all these extremely dangerous moving industrial machines with no safety measures whatsoever in order to, keep the thing moving.
Well, that's just terrifying. Thanks for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can have that.
All right. And also, Yochai, I'll have links to all of the, to Karen and all the other stuff that you've done that you've mentioned. I'll have links in the show notes for that as well. Thank you guys for talking with me today. I think we're done talking about all this bullshit. What do you say we roll some dice?
Let's do it.
Cool. All right. Bye.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.